Life certainly is different now, but one thing hasn't changed, and that's no matter who you are, education has the power to bring out your potential, to propel you forward, no matter your background, where you are from, or what you want to achieve. At NBCC, we're still committed to hands-on learning and instructor-led education, whether that's in person or virtually through connected classrooms. Just remember, education knows no boundaries, and neither should you.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Bon matin à tous. Welcome to this morning's Breakfast and Learn Atelier de Matin, presented by the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton. My name is John Wishart, and I'm the CEO of the Chamber, and it's my pleasure today to act as your host and moderator. I want to thank you for tuning in this morning as we discuss an important topic: breaking down barriers, the value of return to work planning and disability management, éliminer les obstacles, les valeurs de la planification de retour au travail dans la question de invalidité. Before we dive into the topic, I would like to introduce Erin Cushing, Coordinator of Entrepreneurship in the Research, Innovation, and Experiential Education Department at NBCC. The Chamber is fortunate to have NBC as a presenting sponsor of our entire Breakfast and Learn series. And while we normally would be at NBCC Moncton this morning enjoying breakfast in person, under these circumstances, we come to you virtually, and we're pleased that NBC has stayed with us during this virtual series of 2021. So Erin, I'd invite you now to say a few words.
Hey, good morning, everybody. As John said, my name is Erin Cushing, and I'm the Entrepreneurship Coordinator at NBCC. And we're really pleased that we are still able to support the Chamber and this series. So thank you for having me this morning. One of my roles is overseeing our mentorship program called OASIS. If you are needing some mentorship, we'd be glad to have you. We have a new cohort of that program beginning in the fall. Applications are going to open in June. And if you are willing to act as a mentor in that program, we'd love to have you jump on board there as well. You can reach me at oasis@nbcc.ca. I'd love to talk with you and explain, give you a little bit more details about that. But enough about me. Let's jump into the rest of the morning. So thanks for having me. I look forward to the presentation.
Thank you very much, Erin, and thank you to NBCC for their continued support. So before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to let everyone know that you can pose a question at any time during the presentation by using the chat function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We'll get to as many questions as time allows at the end of the presentation. So return to work planning doesn't need to be complicated, but it can be creative. Often organizations struggle with finding meaningful tasks that are beneficial to both the injured worker and the organization. Return to work planning is also the most effective way to tackle injury duration, which is one of the biggest drivers of workers' compensation costs. And as we all know, while workers' compensation costs have fallen somewhat here in New Brunswick over the last 2 years, they continue to be an area of concern for all employers. Today, we're very fortunate and pleased to have with us Dallas Mercer of Dallas Mercer Consulting. Dallas will share her wealth of industry experience implementing return to work plans. In 2002, Dallas founded Dallas Mercer Consulting, offering disability management services. As an employer advocate, she had added efficiency to sick leave and workers' compensation claims processes, saving clients time and money and allowing them to focus on their core business. DMC has expanded to offer safety training, safety consulting, and industrial hygiene services to over 550 clients across Canada. And DMC has offices in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And Dallas just mentioned to me before we went live that she's added yet another person to their Moncton office. So thank you for adding to Greater Moncton's economy, Dallas. And with that intro, it's now my pleasure to turn the microphone over to Dallas Mercer. Dallas.
Thank you, John, and thanks for joining me this morning. It's a bit of a dry topic this morning, so feel free to have your coffee to keep the interest going if that's what's required. So thank you. This is an important topic, as John said, and the cost of workers' compensation, while it has decreased a little bit in New Brunswick in the last couple of years. It's still among some of the highest rates in the country. So I think that we can't really take our foot off the pedal in making sure that we're doing the best that we can from an employer's perspective. So after today's seminar, I'm hoping that, the key takeaways will be, communicating the value of return to work for the employer and the worker. I want to go through the key components of return to work planning, and also anticipating some of the barriers that you may come across, and then how to mitigate some of those barriers. So as John said, we were founded in 2002. We have offices in Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. I'm joining you today from Newfoundland. It's a really gray, foggy day here. We work with employers across the country from a variety of industries. I think we work in almost every industrial setting that exists. Our clients are union, multi-union, and non-union. So we have experience in all of those areas. Let's take a quick look to kind of set the stage, I guess, for the presentation in understanding the claim duration. So in New Brunswick, up until 2018, the duration has been steadily climbing. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. Duration is the biggest driver of costs, duration meaning how long a person is off work. So in days up until 2018, the last statistics with the Association of Workers' Comp Boards of Canada have New Brunswick at 112.34 days. Now, I think after 2018, New Brunswick's workers' comp actually changed the way they calculate it. So it would look a little bit different, but this gives you a snapshot that the duration is definitely going in the wrong direction. So why does duration matter? And duration matters because it has the greatest impact on cost. Studies show a worker who's injured and off work for more than 6 months has less than 50% chance of returning to work. So, you need to think about anybody that you may have off work and how long they've been off work. It only takes 21 days to form a habit and about 66 days for that new behavior to become automatic. So if you think of someone who's off work for over 6 months with less than a 50% chance of returning to work, and how habits are formed, then the odds are stacked against you. So what is return to work? So return to work can be one of two scenarios. It can be early and safe return to work, meaning that while a person is recovering, they're at work doing something meaningful for the organization. And there also can be the obligation to reemploy, which is when a worker reaches maximum medical recovery or they've plateaued in their recovery, and then the employer has an obligation to bring them back to work. So return to work planning allows the injured worker to engage in meaningful work while they recover from their injuries. And that is the focus. I mean, keeping a worker connected to the workplace is the single most important thing that as an employer you can do for a worker who's off. And this doesn't necessarily just apply to injured workers. It could be people who are off sick as well, but keeping them connected to the workplace is really critical. And the return to work should be customized for the worker. And of course, you have to consider what their functional abilities are. So what is safe for that worker to be able to do while they're at work and while they're recovering? So who benefits from return to work? Well, the employer obviously has great benefits. You retain your experienced employees. You reduce turnover, so having to hire other people. Better employee relations. If your employees know that you're an employer who is willing to bring people back and find accommodations for them, then that creates better relations. Also allows you to maintain productivity. Depending on who in your organization is injured, it can certainly have an impact on your ability to produce. It also lowers your workers' compensation costs and sets expectations in advance. So if you have a disability management program or you have a return to work program, and your employees know that ahead of time, then there's no, when someone's injured, they automatically know you're going to find a way to bring them back and to find something that is within their functional abilities for them to do. For the employee, the benefits are also great. It maintains social connections, the sense of purpose and sense of value. Somebody has something to do, and you feel beneficial when you're able to work. Financial security, eliminating the wage loss. Skill retention. So if people stop doing the job that they were doing, they may lose their skills. better morale when there's better morale in the organization when employers are accommodating their workers. They see management's commitment to their health and wanting them to recover while they're at work. And there's also a sense of security and stability for an employee who's injured. They know that their employee is going to look after them. So there's great benefits for the employee and the employer. There's actually benefits for society as a whole. I mean, co-workers, workers' family, when a worker is getting up and going to work every day and maintaining the routine and feeling useful to the organization, healthcare providers, unions. So everybody benefits from having a return to work program in place. Remember, the performance of the group affects everyone in the industry. So if you think about yourself as an employer and who is in your industry group, then everybody in your industry group benefits from what you're doing. And I'll just give you an example of that. Let me just go back one slide. Please. So let me just give you an example of that. We worked in the fish processing industry, I think in 2004 or 2003. I got my first client in the fishing industry in Newfoundland and Labrador, the fish processing industry. And I remember the employer being so delighted with us being able to lower their experience rating because we were able to bring people back. And I explained to the company that if we could actually get more organizations within the same industry doing the same thing, then you can lower the base rate. You won't just affect the experience. And I remember the employer said, well, this kind of gives me a competitive advantage. And I said, well, you can only go so low with the experience. If everybody in your industry is doing a similar thing, then you can actually lower the base rate. So it took some time, and he did introduce me to the association, which are really their competitors. So while they're fierce competitors, they all agreed to start putting processes in place to manage return to work. And at the time, their rate was over $6. And now it's just over $2. So, it took some time, of course, but that's right off the bottom line in how they have been able to bring their rate down. So working as an industry can be really effective. I mean, as one organization, obviously you can impact your experience, but if you think about, you might be competitors, but if you work together, you can really have an impact on your experience rating. And that's really what it takes to have a dramatic impact on your base rate in the workers' comp system. There's also return to work legislation. So return to work isn't just the right thing to do, it's actually the law. So as of December 2019, WorkSafe amended their legislation regarding the obligation to reemploy, reinforcing return to work unless it causes undue hardship. So there's legislation, of course. Section 42.4 talks about suitable work an employer shall offer to reemploy. So this legislation actually outlines what an employer's obligations are. Section 42.41 talks about suitable work. An employer shall offer to reemploy. So it discusses what kind of work is considered suitable work. 42.42 talks about the duration of time that you will have to accommodate someone. So if a worker worked with you for 12 consecutive months, or if they worked with you for multiple seasons, so if they're seasonal workers and they've worked with you for 2 or more seasons, then you have an obligation to reemploy, to bring people back to their essential duties or their essential work. So essential duties are the duties that are required in order to get the task done. So section 42.43 talks about accommodating the work to the point of undue hardship. So you have an obligation to bring the worker back to the point of undue hardship, meaning you would have to prove, and the standard of proof is pretty high. So you would have to prove to WorkSafe that you are not able to bring the worker back. It would either cause you to go out of business or, would have significant financial hardship on the organization. And they have become, just due to recent case law, the workers' compensation boards in Canada have taken a bit more of a tougher stand on that, enforcing employers to demonstrate that they actually can prove undue hardship if they had to accommodate a worker. Section 42.4 talks about what position to bring a worker back to. Like if you're bringing a worker back to alternate employment, what tests you have to meet to be comparable earnings, whether or not the position has the same degree of responsibility, what the requirements were for the position. So it outlines what it actually is. Section 42.45 discusses undue hardship. So it outlines actually what would be considered undue hardship. Now, if you bring somebody back or a worker is cleared to come back when it's normal layoff time, or you've had layoff other people, you can demonstrate that, then that's fine to be able to provide that information to workers' comp. Section 42.46 of the legislation talks about timeframes and how long you have to bring a worker back. And section 42.47 talks about dismissing the worker. So if you bring a worker back and you accommodate a worker, and then you lay the worker off within 6 months, then it will be determined that you did not fulfill your obligation. And there will be penalties for that. But like I said, if it's normal layoff time, or if you've laid off other people, or if you can demonstrate that you've had to lay the worker off because of reasons not related to the injury, then that should be fine. Section 42.48 just talks about the presumption legislation. It's presumed that you have to bring the worker back. 42.49 talks about business reasons. So there could be reasons why you had to let the worker go. And section 42.410 discusses any company that has collective agreements. So whether the collective agreement or the workers' compensation legislation, whichever affords the worker the greater benefit, is what you have to go with. And section 42.5 talks about enforcement. And there are a multitude of policies that go along with this that breaks down what the legislation says. So I would encourage you to take the time to have a look at some of those policies. Policy 21-413, because that actually outlines more of an interpretation to the legislation as to what employers' obligations are with returning a worker to employment. So the purpose of the policies is to inform workplace parties of their responsibilities in return to work, and advise workplace parties of their reemployment rights and obligations. And it also communicates WorkSafe's commitment to ensure that all workplace parties meet their legislated obligations. So the statements include that return to work is therapeutic, that employers have obligations and the worker has to cooperate. WorkSafe will partner with workplaces and provide assistance. And I have to say, WorkSafe has been a great partner for DMC with our clients, with some of the creative things we have had to do with certain organizations in New Brunswick in order to make return to work possible. And they've been very open and understanding with certain programs that we wanted to put in place. Employer legislated obligations include contacting the worker. So at DMC, we always recommend that an employer have contact with the worker who's off at least once a week. And it might be more often if you're arranging return to work or there's something going on, or there's, a worker has returned to work and maybe the work is not going well. So you might have to talk obviously more often, but for a worker who is off work, then it should be at least once a week. And they should be meaningful conversations. Offer suitable work and make accommodations. Maintain communication. So if you do have an employee who is back doing a return to work program, it's important to maintain communication with them to make sure that everything is going okay, or whether or not they might be able to progress. You should always be thinking of progressing the worker depending on how they're doing. But it's better to have communication than wait till something goes wrong. And then, the worker might say that people have been asking me to do things outside of of what I'm physically able to do. So just having that communication hopefully will prevent those things from happening. The employer also has an obligation to cooperate with WorkSafe and provide information to them, and obviously not to discriminate. The worker legislated obligations include employer contact. So a worker also has an obligation to maintain contact with their employer. So if you have a worker, for example, who is off work and you're not able to reach them, or they're not returning your calls, then certainly that's something you would bring to WorkSafe and have a discussion so they can remove that barrier. A worker also has an obligation to cooperate with suitable work. So if you offer work that's in accordance with their functional abilities and meets their functional abilities, then they do have an obligation to cooperate and participate in that suitable work program. They also have an obligation to maintain communication, same as the employer, and cooperate with WorkSafe, and also as well provide information to WorkSafe. The statements also talk about reemployment and what that looks like and enforcement of that. So, in ensuring that employers do participate and offer suitable work, and also that the worker has an obligation. So the enforcement is not just on the employer side, it's actually on both sides. So the policy 21-420 talks about WorkSafe supporting injured workers throughout their return to work efforts. WorkSafe promoting early and safe return to work as being clinically and vocationally therapeutic. WorkSafe recognizes that return to work minimizes the injured worker's wage loss, which of course would have an impact on the employer's rates. WorkSafe promotes cooperation and active participation of all parties involved in return to work. And WorkSafe requires that injured workers actively participate in all return to work activities and communicates that there's consequences for not participating. So a worker who does not participate in return to work when it's deemed that it's safe for the worker to do so, there are consequences for not participating. WorkSafe promotes following a structured plan to help injured workers restore their maximum function, enabling return to work. They promote returning to productive work. We don't want to bring a worker back to work that's not meaningful, obviously, for the organization, not good for the organization, and that's not good for the worker either. WorkSafe promotes cooperation and enforcing the legislative responsibilities. They support return to work. They would provide third-party mediation. So if there's some dispute between the employer and the worker that they are unable to get past, then they would provide mediation to help resolve some of those barriers. And they also promote active communication between all parties involved in the return to work and rehab. So those policies really build on what the spirit of the legislation is intended to do. So you also need to be cognizant of the fact that even though workers' comp has its legislation regarding obligation to reemploy, and then they have their policies, it's also in human rights legislation that you can't discriminate against a worker who's sick or a worker who's able to come back to work. So it's not just workers' comp, it's also human rights legislation. So let's talk a little bit about barriers or challenges. Let's think about what are some of the issues that arise for workers. Sometimes workers have challenges interacting with WorkSafe. They could be intimidated or not want to have conversations or not really know what they're supposed to be doing or saying or asking. So that might be a challenge for some workers. There could be financial strain for workers because getting workers' comp benefits is a percentage of their normal wages. It could impact family relationships. There could be pressure. They could be feeling pressure to return to work, or they could be putting pressure on themselves to return to work. There also could be stigma of being an injured worker, and they might, feel that maybe their coworkers are talking about them, or that the employer maybe thinks they're not injured, or, injured workers could have lots of thoughts about those kinds of things, and it's quite common. There could be health issues other than those identified. So a worker could have health issues other than the injury that they had at work, and those health issues could be impacting them. A lot of workers also have a fear of re-injury, that they could get re-injured with coming back to work. Some of the challenges for employers are, some employers have challenges finding modified duties or being able to think of modified duties. And I have to say that almost, the majority of our clients will say to me, especially in the early days of working with us, that, they had a lot of trouble, or we don't have a lot of modified work here. And I have to say, as of yet, we have not had overcome that challenge. We've always been able to find modified work for our clients. Sometimes we have to be extremely creative because some organizations, do have some challenges in that area, but there are always ways to find modified duties. Some organizations are seasonal, and that poses a challenge because, if the season is shut down, what do you do then? How are you going to offer modified work? And that's certainly a challenge, no doubt, but it's also one that we've been able to overcome. Time lags for treatment and diagnosis. So, there's wait times for diagnostic testing. So for employers who want to accommodate their workers and you have to wait till the worker has an MRI or has a CAT scan, or you're waiting to see a specialist, that can be extremely challenging and frustrating for employers. There could be issues between the relationship with the manager or supervisor. So the employee, something may have happened, and the relationship might be damaged, or there might be issues. The worker physicians might not be educated in return to work and understanding that you as an employer want to accommodate the worker, and the physician is saying, no, they can't come back, or no, they need to stay off work. And it's a challenge as the employer, because you know that you can safely accommodate that worker. There could be a breakdown in communication where, the worker is not communicating with you, or you have not maintained communication with the employee. And also there might be lack of availability of functional information, because in order to find something that's safe for the worker on your work site, you need to have functional information. You need to know what is safe for the worker to be able to do, what they're physically able to do at the workplace. So sometimes that is unclear or unavailable. So to mitigate those barriers, communication to all stakeholders is recommended. All stakeholders within the system, meaning the employer, the worker, WorkSafe, the doctor, or healthcare provider, could be an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist, and if it's a unionized setting, the union as well. Return to work planning in advance. So it is always challenging to try to do return to work planning at the moment when you need it. It's better to do it in advance, when before something happens. Having identified some modified duties, maybe having functional abilities forms so the doctors can complete them, and communicating with the healthcare provider. Having company awareness, so letting everybody in the organization know that if you are injured on our workplace, then we are going to find opportunities for you to return to work. And then it's not a surprise, or it's not a surprise for the worker, but also as an employer, you're not panicked in trying to find options for the worker. And understanding the role. So who in the organization is going to be involved in that? So who in the organization is going to take responsibility for ensuring that work is identified, communicating with WorkSafe, and having that done ahead of time? Then there's no panic, and then there's no time lapse in making sure that is working. So implementing a return to work plan, as I said, don't wait until it happens. It's always best to plan early and plan that you're going to have to do that. So plan for the worst case scenario. The chances that you'll have a positive impact and the likelihood of achieving return to work are much better when it's the earlier that is done. Odds are increasingly against the employer the longer the situation is left unmanaged. And we talked in the earlier slides about how long it takes to form a habit, and then for that habit to become ingrained. So, having this done ahead of time is always better. Our philosophy at DMC is we don't want someone to have a lost time claim. So if injuries can happen, but we should be able to quickly have return to work in place immediately for the worker to be able to return to something that's safe. So having a return to work program in place can drastically reduce the odds. So, and setting expectations in advance. Everybody likes to know what's going to happen, so that, because it adds extra stress and anxiety when people don't know what's going to happen. So, having that expectation set in advance creates a more supportive workplace culture. So assess your workplace, break down your tasks. Look at physical requirements for some of the jobs. What are the lifting requirements? How often does someone have to walk in that position? How long are they standing? How long are they sitting? So if you take your positions and you break down some of this, you can easily figure out what might be good for someone depending on what their limitations are. What tasks could you modify in certain jobs? What are the skills of your employees? So what can you have employees do? Because if they don't have the skills, then that will eliminate some jobs. What are the things that need to be done? Is there training that people need to do? Do you have needs in other parts of your business? So think those things through, and you quickly come up with a list, I'm sure. Are there sedentary jobs that require sitting? Are there positions with no lifting and no bending? Are there positions where people could use the work with one arm if they have a broken arm or something wrong with one arm? Some people may not be able to be at work. In some occupations, especially in the areas where the presumption legislation is used for post-traumatic stress disorder, work itself might be a trigger. So then you might need to look outside of your workplace. You may want to compile a list of options, but you need to know the physical restrictions of the worker and then use the hierarchy of return to work. So this is what DMC uses. We use a hierarchy of return to work with priority 1 is being at your own job with full hours and you're doing your pre-injury duties and you might have some modifications. And as you go down through the priorities, you only really move away from the work when there's nothing available. When you bring a worker back to work, you should keep them as close as possible to their pre-injury job. So if it's not the job that they were doing, you might be, first of all, you might be able to modify the job they're doing. If it's not that, then how can you keep them in their own department? Or how can you keep them close to their coworkers and these kinds of things? And you only take them away to have alternate work, which has nothing to do with their previous work, if you really have no choice to do that. But you should always be working to move them up in priority, to get them closer and closer and closer as they're recovering to what their pre-injury job was. So they shouldn't just be put in a position and left there. You should be progressing all the time to what your pre-injury job was. When you're implementing your return to work, it's important to maintain contact with the worker, determine the essential duties, as we talked about with the hierarchy, use functional abilities information. So you need to know what the worker is capable of doing. Review options, talk to the employee. They have tons of ideas about what they might be able to do. So engage the workers is a valuable thing to do. And offer the work, and it's always a good idea to put that offer in writing. Communicate with WorkSafe. So even though the system's designed to be self-reliant, meaning that you as the employer can implement return to work, it's important to communicate with WorkSafe. Communicate often with the employee while they're in their plan. The plan must be progressive. So when I talked about the hierarchy and moving a worker always as close as possible to their pre-injury position. Reevaluate often. And of course, you need to have communication with the employee in order to do that. And it's always good to set the expectations in advance. You might need to adjust the plan, but you might say you're going to do a week of this and then a week of this, moving the worker closer. So you're setting expectations for the worker and they know what they have to look forward to. We all operate better when we have goals and we know what the expectations are of us. So how does this look in real life? So in a kitchen or restaurant, it might be preparing food in a seated position. It might be taking orders over the telephone. In the automobile industry, it could be doing safety checks, oil changes, brake changes. In nursing homes and hospitals, it could be providing companionship. It might be like personal care duties or calling family members to provide updates. It might be helping with feeding. You might actually partner with another employee and help them. In the trucking, it might be driving with help to unload or doing short haul runs or being an extra on the truck to help someone. In a warehouse, it might be doing inventory. In a retail store, it might be greeting customers or answering or transferring phone calls. In a janitorial area, it might be disinfecting surfaces that are at waste level. Plants and factories might be workstations that only require supervision of belts or actioning buttons. In construction, it might be doing audits and checks, installing doorknobs, painting, taping. So any industry could be catching up on training or policy reviewing. There could be administrative duties in an office setting if available or from home. And of course, obviously we've all, or a lot of us have adapted to that. It could also be help with supervising duties. You kind of need to think if you're stuck. You need to ask yourself, what would I do if I had an extra employee for a few weeks? What are the things I could have somebody do? So we obviously have to think outside the box all the time for our clients with our seasonal companies. We have had to find work for workers in the off season. In the ambulance industry, we've had to find work for workers outside of the ambulance industry because they're unable, especially if they have physical limitations. We can't put an extra person on an ambulance because if they stop at an accident, we can't have somebody sit in the ambulance while other people are obviously involved. So it can require a lot of creativity. Some owners have networks of companies and they might be able to accommodate someone within another organization that they may own, which is a possibility. So, and you might have to modify the time or you might have to modify the task. So you might have to have somebody come in for less time, or you might have to modify the task, meaning modify the work that somebody is doing. So workers' comp is designed to be a self-reliant model, and there's no cookie cutter model for return to work. It's different for every organization, but there's fundamentals. Employers play a major role in the return to work success. So as an employer, you can make or break the return to work program. You need to involve the worker. Don't wait for WorkSafe to initiate it. You should be way ahead of this. It's, you're paying those rates, you're responsible, and you need to take ownership and be engaged in this process. WorkSafe, however, can help you remove barriers. So if there are barriers that are presented, then you should lean on them to help you through that. And also remember confidentiality. Even though you're bringing workers back and other workers know they're coming back, you don't need to discuss what's going on. I mean, obviously people understand what the functional abilities are of a worker, but just remember to maintain people's confidentiality. So I'm happy to take any questions you might have. I also just wanted to give you a little bit of information that we have. I think you guys will be the first people we're going to publicly share this with, but we have created, or we're in the process of creating courses per province. New Brunswick's course hopefully will be ready within the next probably 6 to 8 weeks. And it's a course that employers can do. I used to do a lot of workshops. And obviously I can't do workshops anymore. So in lieu of workshops, we're creating courses, and they're going to be based on each provincial jurisdiction on workers' compensation. So just keep an eye out for those courses that you will be able to take hopefully in the next few weeks. And if you have any questions about that, you can certainly contact Jillian at dmconsulting.ca, Jillian with a G. She's on this session today. And she can provide any information to you if you have any questions about that or want to be notified when they are actually released. But I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast. I'm from Newfoundland, so I tend to talk fast when I get going, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Dallas. Merci. I'm sure there's an old joke about Newfoundland being half an hour faster than the rest of Canada, so maybe that's why it's definitely acceptable. So it is now time for the Q&A. So I'd really encourage anyone who would like to pose a question to Dallas to use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. While we wait for those, Dallas, I do have a few that came up while you were speaking. You mentioned this concept of suitable work. And under New Brunswick legislation, is the definition of what is suitable at the discretion of the employer alone?
No, it's not. Yes and no. So it has to be within the worker's functional abilities. It has to be within their cognitive abilities. So, and it depends on if the worker's still recovering. So if a worker's still recovering, yes, obviously the employer has the right to find work within their workplace that's suitable. If you're looking at obligation to reemploy, which means the worker has medically plateaued, they're not able to do the previous work, but now you need to accommodate them, then there's a bit of a different bar for that. But if you're looking at accommodating work or early and safe return to work for them to come back and recover while they're at work, then yes, the employer can identify options, but they have to meet the worker's physical and functional abilities.
Is there ever tension between a return to work plan and the employee's job description?
Is there ever
tension, I guess, or conflict between those two things?
Yeah, I've probably seen everything. So it's quite possible. There could be, but typically, it's temporary. So, and those expectations should be set in advance that as the worker progresses in their recovery, then they will move closer to their pre-injury position.
Do we know what percentage of companies, say in Atlantic Canada, actually have a return to work plan now, or at least a policy in place?
I don't think the Association of Workers' Comp Boards of Canada keep those kinds of stats. I would say if you look at duration, I'd say pretty low number, because in Atlantic Canada, we have very high duration compared to the rest of Canada. So there's a lot of work to do. I think there's great strides we could make as employers to put these processes in place. I think Manitoba's duration is like 42 days or something. So, I think there's a lot of work we can do when we get over 100 days. You're talking 4 months that average worker is off work. That's a long time. And the odds are against us according to the stats on how long it takes, whether you're going to be successful in bringing a worker back to work. So, you need to prepare, and we prepare for all kinds of things, but we don't prepare for this. And we really need to be engaged in this. And your workers' comp is not a fixed tax. You can reduce it.
And as you mentioned, there is a direct correlation between duration of claims and the cost to the system, right? So
it's the driver. The driver of cost to the system is duration. So if there's one thing you want to do to reduce your rate, it's return to work.
Right. We just have to look at Manitoba to understand why the rate is so low there. Yeah.
And Alberta as well.
Right. Is there any kind of appeals mechanism in the workers' comp legislation or policy when there is conflict between whether it's an acceptable return to work plan?
So the appeals process can be accessed when there's a decision. So you need a decision from WorkSafe in order to access the appeals process. And there's two levels of appeal. There's the internal resolutions office, and then there's the external appeals process, which in New Brunswick is called the Workers' Compensation Appeals Tribunal. So you need decisions to access that. They do have third-party mediation for disputes that you can access. But really, if you just sit down with the stakeholders, with the worker and the employer, in our case, of course, we represent our clients, so we would be at those meetings too. And workers' comp, you can usually resolve whatever problems there are. I mean, I haven't seen many issues that we have not been able to reconcile and resolve.
I'm going to ask a question that's a little outside today's presentation, but I think it's probably top of mind for a lot of employers. We're just at the 1 year point of COVID. A lot of employees have been working remotely and at home. Hopefully soon we'll see a return to office. And I think there's some talk about, fear of return to the workplace, with vaccinations, perhaps some mental health, concerns, that sort of thing. Do you have any advice on easing that transition back to everyone actually working in the workplace?
Well, yeah, I think communication is the most important thing, and setting expectations and being open. And, we've all gone through this pandemic differently. How you handled it and I handled it are totally different. There could be triggers for you, different triggers for me. So I think employers need to be really open to people's anxieties and understanding that people went through different things. People had their kids home. People's parents could have gotten sick, or fear of the parents getting sick, or bringing it home if they have older people living with them. There's so many different facets, and I don't even think we've gone there yet, John. I think this whole thing is going to be huge. In fact, we've increased our bench strength at DMC, hiring a mental health trauma disability manager recently, just because we know that there is going to be a whole different scenario. In how we come out of this and what workplaces are going to look like. And I think employers need to communicate, and be open, set expectations about what the workplace is going to look like. People might not all want to gather anytime soon in the cafeteria or the lunchroom, so we just need to be mindful of people's anxieties. And I think not quick to judge or criticize, and try to be open and understanding.
Yeah, I think our awareness of, returning to the workplace and what it does to, you psychologically and a mental health perspective will definitely be top of mind in the next year or so. We tend to think about workplace injury or sickness in a physical aspect, and not necessarily what it does to you when you've been away for so long and there's a public health scare.
John, we're actually going to be doing a workshop soon. The new mental health expert that we hired as part of DMC's team is going to be doing a workshop soon. So if you want, we can let you guys know. And if you wanted to promote that, we'd be happy for you to have any of your members attend. And Jillian can make sure that you're on the list.
I think that would be a great value, because I've just talking to some of our members, I've heard that concern expressed often about whether they are equipped to deal with that eventuality. Dallas, you mentioned right at the end, you are going to have a series of courses on this. These are going to be online courses, are they? Or, okay.
Yeah, they're going to be offered on a platform. I mean, I don't want to put too much anxiety on myself and Jill here, but we're getting close to finalizing. Our goal is to get Atlantic Canada's courses done within the next couple of months. So we're getting close, and they are, we tried to make it a bit cheeky and it's animated because it can't be me doing a course. So they've made an avatar. So, we're going to do our best to make it as interesting as possible. But yeah, it's kind of like the workshops I've done where I kind of do an overview of everything. And it'll probably take an hour and a half to do the course. But it should equip employers with a lot more than they currently have in understanding how the system works.
I'd be curious to know who was given the task of creating the avatar of you, Dallas. That, I don't know, is that workplace security or not?
Yeah, it was an interesting, we've had some interesting chuckles.
I'm sure. Well, I think with that, we'll bring things to a close. I'd like to thank very much Dallas Mercer and Jillian Williamson of Dallas Mercer Consulting for bringing light to this topic of the value of managing a return to work following a disability injury. It's a topic that we should all understand, as we just mentioned, as we emerge from this very prolonged period of disability generally in our workplaces due to COVID. Before we close today's session, I just want to mention our next Breakfast and Learn will be held on May the 5th, again from 8 till 9 a.m. It will feature Mariska Lupke of IG Wealth Management on a very different topic than today. It's about tax planning for your business, which is also very essential, as we know. And it's been an interesting year for taxation for all of our businesses. We hope you can join that session, and registration's now open on our website, ccgm.ca. I'd like to thank again Aaron Cushing from MBCC for being with us today and bringing greetings. And thank you, Dallas and Jillian, for joining us today. And thanks for all of you for joining us. Merci de vous être joints à nous. Please stay safe. Stay safe in the workplace, and work with your employees to create that good return to work plan. And we hope to see all of you again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.